So today for review, I got a pretty cool micro brand. It is the only watch I've really ever seen that's affordable, I guess you can say, that has a carbon fiber dial. It is the watch I have on my wrist right now, the Collins Bronson, and it's a pretty cool brand. I got to meet the owner, so maybe I'll talk about that a little bit, and let's get into the review. So here we have our nice carbon fiber dialed Collins Bronson. And a little about the brand. Collins was founded in 2016 by Jimmy Collins, hence the name of the brand. And they started out with sunglasses. They did, I believe, a Kickstarter for the sunglasses. And after a year in 2017, they started moving on to mechanical watches. And again, they went the Kickstarter route. They released this model in a couple of different dial variants, case materials. Here I have this bead blasted PVD case, but they also have just a regular bead blasted case, and then another darker PVD, I think. So yeah, Jimmy Collins, he owns a video production company as well as a music studio, and that's where he's drawn a good amount of inspiration for his watches from, like old musical equipment, just certain textural designs and certain physical aspects of his recording equipment. He tried to incorporate into his watch design, and I think we'll see some of that coming to life a little bit later in the review. Just to get some dimensions out of the way, we have a 40 millimeter case with about a 48.5 lug to lug length, thickness of about 12 to 12.5, and a lug width of 20. The mechanical specifications: it has a Seiko NH35 movement in it, which is supposedly regulated in 6 positions, which I definitely do believe, because over the past, I would say, 2 weeks that I've been timing this thing consistently, it's been running at about between, honestly, 0 and 2 seconds a day. So it's been really very accurate. We have a sapphire crystal on the front as well as the case back. We have 100 meters of water resistance, but no screw down crown, just a free crown. And super luminova for the lume, obviously in the old radium style, as we have that kind of beigeish tannish color for the indices or the markers. And supposedly it is assembled, tested, and regulated in the USA. And the case is, as I said earlier, a PVD bead blasted finish. It's got definitely a darker appearance than I thought it did as when I looked on the website, but I think it does match nicely along with the carbon fiber dial. And speaking of the dial, let's move on to that. As you can see, it has this super nice, super cool textured carbon fiber dial, and this is what drew me to the watch, because I've pretty much just never seen a watch with a carbon fiber dial. Nonetheless, at this price point, I think they retail at about $400 for the carbon fiber dial variant, and $350, I believe, for the ones without carbon fiber dials. And I think that's very cool for the price. If we kind of try to focus in, there's certain movements, I think you can see it definitely right here. As I'm moving this dial around, if you're looking at like that 11 o'clock marker, you can see the carbon fiber dial appears as if it's moving under the actual numeral. So it almost gives a floating effect to the numerals on the dial, which is actually really, really cool. And I think definitely to the benefit of this watch. Other than that, we got a pretty classic Fleeker style layout, the numerals 1 through 12 on the dial. Classic Fleeker styled hands, very regular but very loomed seconds hand. All the hands are done, if it can focus, in this matte black texture, which is nice because it doesn't pop out from the dial. I know there was a previous version of this that actually did have glossier hands, and it did pop out too much from the dial. It was kind of a distraction, and it took away from the dial, I would say. So this update is very welcome. We get a nice little framed date window there. And there's just small elements that call back to his music recording equipment. Like we have here the 10 with the 0 with a slash through it. It's very reminiscent of, I guess, his numerals that he would constantly see on his recording equipment. There was a difference in the version 1 model with the seconds hand. It was not loomed along the entire length and had a kind of triangular / diamond shaped marker at the end, and that was to evoke the meters on volume equipment. And although it looked nice in not in practice, in theory, in practice it was kind of hard to see at certain times. So he went ahead, sacrificed that design choice to overall make the design more wearable, make the design more useful. And overall, I like that we have just very little text on the dial, just the brand name, the model number, and 100 meters. It doesn't have to say it's automatic. If you're buying the watch, you know it's automatic. So that's it, second markers around the outer track there. I don't know how well this will come through, but it's at a lot of angles. It looks like there's a pretty defined circle around the inner carbon fiber dial and this outer track here. You can kind of see it very well here between like the 12 and 2, and I don't think that distracts from the design. It's kind of nice because I think it segments the pieces of the design. So that's just a little thing that I noticed while wearing the watch, and it's something that definitely shines through that you don't always notice. So since this is such a cool dial and such an interesting dial, let's try to see what we can, gather from a more macro level. So here we are at macro with the Collins, and I think what you can really tell is like how finely and well done the dial is really printed. There's really no bleeding in the markers, there's no misprinting, there's no specks of dust or specks of dirt, and I think it's just really well done. The lume is very well applied, even though there's some untraditional shapes like the 7 right here. Even in the hands, there's not really any, or at least too much rough edging. There you can see a little bit on that hour hand on the right side. Tiny little bit of either dust or just imperfect finishing, but overall I think it just looks really, really nice. And as you can see, as I tilt the watch a little bit, the carbon fiber is just really, really dynamic. It just comes to life depending on which way you turn it, which way you just observe it on your wrist or throughout the day. It just comes to life in different ways, forms, and it's just a very living texture that's really just nice to see, and a welcome addition at the really sub $500 price range. I mean, overall, I just think the dial is done really nicely. Numerals all look really crisp. No error in the carbon fiber dial. Just great job. So moving on to the case of this watch, as I have said previously like 2 times, we have a PVD and bead blasted case, which gives it this kind of like nice grayish, dark gray texture. And I think it just really complements. It almost blends in or doesn't stand out in comparison to the carbon fiber dial, and lets the carbon fiber dial kind of just take center show and shine. As you can kind of tell with all the reflections you see in the camera, seeing my light, it's not the most anti-reflective crystal, but I think most of the time it works to the benefit because the light helps play with the carbon fiber, and I never once had trouble reading the dial or had trouble, just seeing my watch face, so I don't think it's that bad of an application. Because it's a bead blasted case, there's not really much to talk about in terms of case finishing, just mainly to say that it's done pretty well. If I can just zoom in here really quick, you can see that the texture is just very, very fine. There's really not much going on in terms of polishing, bevels, anything else, but I think it's a no-nonsense functional coating, and it mainly serves to just complement the watch and be secondary to the main show, which is the dial. If you take a look at the crown, this is another inspiration that Jimmy drew from his musical equipment. This crown is very akin to one of those kind of like volume knobs, or maybe not a volume knob, but just whatever kind of knob is on his musical equipment. And it even has this little pointer there, which kind of like dictates, oh, hey, we're at this setting. And I know in an interview he stated that he went with the non-screw down crown because he wanted to have people be able to line up the crown, have the C logo look all nice. But I mean, I feel like most people would have preferred the screw down functionality, and worst comes to worst, I guess you could have played it as, hey, if your crown screw down like this and it's not lined up, well, at least that's your personal setting. But overall, I think the crown is done really nice. It has a nice C emblazoned logo in there, and it's raised, so it has a nice texture to it. As you can see, kind of like here and some of the edges of the case, there is a slight discoloration that happens with the watch, but it's not wear and tear. It's not anything that's bad with the watch itself. It's just, I don't know what it is, but you just wipe it off and it goes away. But you see, look, I just wiped it off, and like now there's no appearance of that discoloration that's still on the other side. I don't know quite what that is, but it's something that's a little weird that I thought, might as well mention. So if we're looking at the case back, you just have the general information, the watch company, the model number, the serial number, which I have number 9, assembled in the USA, and 100 meters water resistant. And you get, the undecorated plain Seiko movement. Nothing special about it, but as I said earlier, it's working impeccably and it's regulated by itself. So honestly, a great movement choice to have because it brings the cost down to a more affordable level and allows him to spend money in other places, such as the carbon fiber dial and the bead blasting finishing. Before we put it on the wrist, let's get a lume shot. So here we have the lume on the Collins. It is very nicely done. It's fully loomed in the numerals, fully loomed in the hands, fully loomed on the seconds, and even the hour pips on the dial are loomed. So it's a very functional and very visible lume. I also really like how the logo is loomed. So it's almost like you have the dial in the dark. And it glows very well, lasts pretty decently. And if we compare it to my Timex, I would say the difference in brightness really isn't that much. It's just more the color of the lume. This is more green. This is more green leaning on the Collins, while the Timex is more of a blue-green, but still blue leaning. And I think the Collins watch has a really good application of lume, and it's definitely something that's a selling point for the watch, or at least a nice addition. So moving on to how the watch wears, I'll put it on my wrist. Today I was wearing my Grand Seiko. So here we have the Collins sitting on my 6.5 inch wrist, and sometimes it's hard to tell, but it does wear very well. I'll zoom out later so we have a better perspective of it, but it does not overhang any side of my wrist. It is definitely near the extremity, but it still is something I can wear. It's a field watch. It's supposed to be a field/pilot watch, so it's supposed to be of a larger styling. But overall, I mean, of course, I would have liked if they would have made it smaller, but I think it does wear well. There's not too much curvature into the lugs. They do definitely just stick out. They don't dip below. They don't dip below the case back, as you can kind of see there. So that's something that they could refine, but I think overall it just does wear nicely, and if you have a 6.5 inch wrist and up, I think you can wear this watch no problem. Here we have the Collins on its stock strap. I think it would have been better if they went with a lighter brown. I think the dark is kind of overpowered by the rest of the watch. It's not really standing out or necessarily adding to the watch in any way. It's just there. The thing I don't like about this strap is just very, very thick. If we bring my calipers in here, we see that it's about 4 millimeters thick, which is very, very thick for a strap. I mean, most straps are around 2 to 3 millimeters, and it doesn't sound like a big difference, but trust me, on the wrist it is. And it's very, very tough to break in at first. I just had it sitting in my watch box, so it did finally conform. But you see, as I have it on the wrist here, it is a nice look overall, I think. I think it does really complement the watch itself. It's a nice beefy strapped, or a tool-tastic kind of watch. But I think, especially with the carbon fiber, it's kind of almost a dressier, special occasion kind of watch, or the tool watch you don't necessarily want to use as a tool watch. But overall, the stitching is really beautifully done on this strap. The quality, I think, is really nice. We have a very well matched buckle with a nice Collins logo in there, nice large holes, two what are those called, adjustable keepers. Overall, very nice strap, but just not my preferred method of wearing the watch. But definitely, if you have a bigger wrist than mine and can tolerate the thickness, I think it's a very good strap. And even with my 6.5 inch wrist, I'm only on the second to sometimes the last hole, so it does fit a variety of wrist sizes. And finally, here we have it on the crown and buckle chevron. I think this strap matches it the best. It has a nice black and blue alternating weave to it, along with the kind of beige golden center stripe. And I think the way the center stripe just runs into the dial kind of plays off this Lume pip and runs through to the dial, even with the arrowhead pointing, and then it continues. I think it just blends really well with this strap. So I think I've showed you nearly everything I can about this watch, so let's get into my final thoughts. So pros and cons of the watch. I think one of the major pros is really how the watch wears. Here you have my 6.5 inch wrist for perspective, 40 millimeter case, about 48 and change lug to lug, and I think it just wears very nicely on the wrist overall. It doesn't look too big, doesn't look too crazy. I just dig the way it wears. So I think that's a definite pro for the con. I think the all kind of like matte finish kind of shrinks the watch down in a sense, like less light reflecting off of it, less, kind of just makes it look smaller. Another definite pro is the dial of the watch. I mean, as you saw from throughout the video, the carbon fiber, super, super cool. It's just different, it's unique, I like it. I think it's also well priced for a regulated movement that is performing spectacularly, a workhorse movement, a unique dial, a micro brand, a pretty good design as far as Flieger style pilot watches go. I think it's just good value for money in general. In general, my cons are I don't love the old style Lume. Over the time of me owning it, I've come to like it a little more than I just originally did, because originally I was just like, I just don't like when companies use that old style Lume. But I get why he used it on this watch, but I would have preferred it as just a regular white style Lume. Another definite con for me is the stock strap it comes on. As I showed you earlier, this strap is ridiculously thick. It just does not wear comfortably. It seems like pretty good leather, good stitching, nice hardware. It's just not very practical for the watch it's on, I feel like. The style matches, the color matches, the overall execution does not. But honestly, I don't feel that there are many cons with this watch in general. I think it's good value for money, as I said. The Lume is good. The execution of the design is good. The printing on the dial is good. Just the watch in general is a very good buy. I think if you have any reservation about buying the watch, just jump in on it. I think if you're looking for a pilot watch, if you're looking for a casual everyday watch, the gray coloration of it really matches with a lot of things. So I think you'll be happy if you get this watch. I certainly have been surprised by it. I never handled one in person, although I met the owner in person, but I was pleasantly surprised by this watch, and I think that's the same reaction that you would get if you decided to jump in on it. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching my video. I hope to see you in another one.